Well, thank you for the very nice introduction, Josephine. And also, I just want to start by thanking all the coordinators. I mean, I can't even imagine the amount of work that takes to put together something like this, right? With thousands, 6,000, 7,000 students. I mean, that's really incredible. And so I just want to give a shout out to all the coordinators for all your wonderful work. And to thank all of you in the audience for coming today, too. I know it's been a long 2 days. You've heard a lot of excellent talks. And so I appreciate your sticking with me. You know, I have to say that over the last 2 days, I'm sure you've heard a lot of great talks about what to do in medicine and what to do when you're applying and what are the things to watch out for, all these kind of practical advice. And actually what I want to do today is to do something a bit different. And I'll say also that this is the first time that I'm going to be talking about a lot of the topics that I'm going to be speaking to you about. Because so much of what we hear is about the traditional, here's what you should do. But I want to address something that we very rarely talk about, and that's fear. There's a quote in Chinese that you have to eat bitter to taste sweet. Eating bitter means to suffer. Growing up in China, I heard the narrative of suffering from my family. My grandparents lost 2 kids during World War II. My father was jailed and tortured during the Cultural Revolution, and he and my mother were dissidents and had to flee the country after Tiananmen Square. They came to the US without money, without family, without language, and managed to raise me and my little sister. Through their stories and their life examples, they show me that suffering was necessary and that we needed to embrace adversity and overcome fear. Well, I was 8 when I came to the US, and I had the easy life, right? I mean, I had 2 parents who loved me. We were really poor, but they made sure that they worked many jobs, multiple jobs each, in order to put food on the table and put a roof over our heads. In China, my father was an engineer, my mother was a teacher. In the US, they worked delivering newspapers, pumping gas, cleaning motel rooms. I knew that my parents ate bitter so that I could taste sweet. But you know what? I couldn't overcome my fear. My fear was something that I faced every day. This is how I spoke. My stutter was often so bad that I couldn't get out any words at all. In China, my teachers thought I was stupid. In the US, they thought I just didn't know English. Well, I knew I wasn't stupid, and I was learning written English pretty quickly. But I was so afraid of stuttering that I did everything I could to get out of speaking. One of my earliest memories is stabbing myself with a pencil so that I didn't have to answer in class. And forget about making friends. To do that, I'd at least have to say my name. Eventually, I got better at speaking, but even then, there was so much else that I was ashamed of. I was ashamed of being an immigrant living in Compton, then East LA, who spoke with an accent, who had no idea what knife or fork to use at fancy dinners. I was ashamed that my father didn't speak English and that my mother wore thrift store clothes 4 sizes too big. I mean, can you imagine that? Now I'm ashamed at my shame. I was ashamed that I didn't know anyone, not one person, who had the career that I wanted, which is to become a doctor. When I started college at Cal State LA, I remember people telling me, what are you thinking? I mean, I would tell people that I wanted to be a doctor, right? And they would laugh. They would say, well, how could you get the grades? Or what about the extracurriculars and leadership experiences? I mean, even the students who have everything, whose parents are doctors, they can't get into medical school. So how can you, with nothing, do it? And it took me, with all my willpower, to not believe them once and to not believe them again and again. So that was 1996, and now forward to now, which is 2013. Through luck and perseverance and really the good fortune of finding mentors who told me I could do it, who really did believe in me, I made it to medical school and then became a resident, and now I'm an attending emergency physician. Now, without doubt, my earlier speech difficulties had a lot to do with my desire to conduct research in doctor-patient communication. In the research that led to my writing my book, When Doctors Don't Listen, I traveled to 52 cities and spoke with over 2,000 people about their healthcare experiences. And believe it or not, what I found as the biggest barrier to good, safe medical care was once again our old friend, fear. Now, I found out about fear in medicine when I was a second-year medical student. I was in St. Louis at Washington University, and my family was back home in LA. By then, my mother had finished taking night classes, and she was teaching second grade in East LA. One day, she called me to tell me that she hadn't been feeling well. She had no energy. She was short of breath. She had a cough that just wouldn't go away. Now, for most people, that probably meant they were tired or maybe she had a virus or something, right? But I knew my mother. I mean, she was a woman who never complained about anything. And so for her to call me to tell me that she wasn't feeling well, I knew that something had to be really wrong. So she had already been to see a doctor who told her, don't worry about it. The second time she went to see him, he did some blood tests and said, well, they're all normal. He told her to take some Prozac because maybe she was depressed. Now, I knew this wasn't right, and I wanted to raise the issue with him, but my mother, she begged me not to. She was so afraid that if she spoke up about her own health care, that she would be perceived as a bad patient. She was so afraid of the repercussions that she and I didn't question her doctor. And so it wasn't until a year later that she was finally diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, cancer that by then had spread to her lungs, her bones, her liver, and her brain. Well, I've since found out that this fear my mother had is common among patients. In particular, our immigrant patients who already feel disenfranchised when it comes to their health, who already have so many other barriers to care, like language and money. And it's not only patients who have fear, it's nurses who are afraid to speak up to doctors when there are mistakes being made. It's medical students who fall prey to the hierarchy, the false bravado of medicine. As a trainee, I was constantly being told that I was too soft, too weak, just because I had emotion and I had empathy. I remember once we couldn't resuscitate 2-year-old twins who drowned in their grandparents' pool, and I was too afraid to have anyone see me cry. So I hid in an empty patient room until I could compose myself. And then when I came out, everybody said, oh, strong work, you didn't cry. Well, it's fear from the doctor's side, too. Our system has gotten such that doctors practice defensive medicine for fear of being sued. Now, I ask you, how messed up is that when patients are scared of doctors and doctors are now scared of patients? Now, fear seems to me like a really bad thing, leading to mistrust and disconnection. Well, recently I read a science article about new research that can stop fear once and for all, and it led me to think, well, would we want this? Would we want to end fear? I mean, there are definitely many times in my life when I would have said very adamantly, absolutely, if only I could have ended my fear of stuttering or my shame of being a poor immigrant. I mean, if we had no fear of failure, imagine what we could accomplish. But is there something also to the act of overcoming fear and facing adversity that's also really important? I mean, do we have to eat bitter to taste sweet? If so, then how can we reconcile these different aspects of fear that result in action rather than isolation, that builds character rather than destroy confidence? Well, I want to share 3 ideas with you today. The first is to separate fear from shame. Fear is when you're afraid of something, afraid of doing something, afraid of trying something. Shame is when what you're afraid of is yourself. Fear is, I have a problem. Shame is, I am the problem. Shame holds us back, and fear doesn't have to. Now, I was so ashamed of being a person who stutters, so ashamed of my immigrant identity. Yet, of course, these are things that can't really be changed, right? Yet, what I could change was my fear of speaking up. Nothing was stopping me from raising my hand in class and trying. What I could change was my own insecurity and my fear of failure. Nothing was stopping me from trying to get good grades and trying to get into medical school. Now, of course, shutting off your shame is much easier said than done. Part of it is about identity and embracing who you are. Let's take my father, for example, Xiao Lu. My father could have easily seen himself as a has-been engineer who couldn't get a job in the US except as a menial laborer. It would have been really hard for him to get up in the morning to clean bedpans and pump gas. But instead, he saw himself as the head of the family who was providing for his daughters. He wasn't ashamed of who he was. Actually, he was so proud. He just turned 70, and he looks back on his life with so much happiness that he rescued us from political persecution and gave us all these opportunities that we never would have had otherwise. Now, how's that for embracing your identity? My father was also a role model for disclosure. When I was younger, people asked me what my parents did, and you know what? I was so ashamed that I wouldn't tell them. And sometimes I lied. When I got good enough at covering up my stutter, I lied about that too. Same with pretending to be the tough doctor, the one who never cries. But the lies, they lead to more shame more lies, and more regret. Shutting off shame also requires a commitment to transparency and honesty. Showing yourself, though, it's really, really hard and really, really scary because you have it all out there, all your insecurities, all your shame. The first time I did this was actually at my medical school interviews, when I decided that if they didn't want me for who I am, then I'm not the right person for them, and this is not the right institution for me. If what they want is an Ivy League educated person whose parents are both doctors, who knows the table manners backwards and forwards and has no insecurities, then that's not me. So I told them exactly who I was, and it felt so strange. I felt naked and raw and exposed. And yet that authentic voice, that's what people relate to. Your story, your struggles, your successes, they are all part of who you are, that make you human and that make you strong and mature and wise. They're also part of your identity, and like mine involves being a Chinese American, a woman, a person who stutters, an immigrant, a physician. Remember that vulnerability is the opposite of shame, and that you have to be willing to be vulnerable and honest and true to yourself to overcome shame. My second idea is to focus your fear outward. If there is a specific situation that you're afraid of, don't ask why you're afraid. Ask, why is this so important to you? Maybe you're afraid of failing in your quest to be a doctor. Well, ask yourself, why do you want to be a doctor? And the answer better not be, I want to have a good job, a stable career, or my parents wanted me to be a doctor, right? I'm sure for all of you here, just like for me, the reason goes much deeper. For me, I was sick as a child. I had severe asthma. And then my mother's illness gave me additional drive to be a healer and a doctor. Growing up in immigrant neighborhoods, I saw the many problems with our communities, and I wanted to be an advocate for those who are underserved. And I'm sure all of you, you have your own reasons that are rooted in your story, in the core of who you are. But no matter what they are, they should speak to who you are and why you want to do what you want to do, what your mission is. Now ask yourself, what is the worst that could happen if I face my fears? Maybe if you apply to medical school, don't get in. Okay, that's pretty bad, but so what? It's expensive, but you got the experience, you'll do better next time. Well, some people will say, well, how come you didn't get in? Well, so what? They all have their motives for asking you. They didn't get in themselves, they're insecure, they didn't even apply, they're trying to put you down, whatever the case might be. Maybe you're afraid of disappointing people, like your parents or your mentors, if you don't get in. But think about how much more disappointed they would be if you never tried. Which brings me to actually the most important question about asking yourself. Actually ask yourself, well, what is the worst that could happen if I don't face my fears? Who is it going to hurt? The world might be deprived of one more caring doctor. Your community might not have the doctor who is going to go back and serve its needs. If I were too scared to speak up in class, I wouldn't be here to speak with all of you now. If my parents were too scared to leave their lives in China, I definitely wouldn't be here now. 6 months ago, I was working in the Mass General emergency room when I heard that 2 bombs had gone off at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. My heart stopped because just a few minutes before, my husband had texted me to say that he was going to watch the race at the finish line. We lived right by the explosions. As patients started coming to the ER, some not breathing, many with missing limbs, all covered with soot and blood, I was so scared that the next patient I'd see would be my husband. I feared for him, for my friends, for my neighbors, for my city. And yet that fear did not paralyze me because I knew what I had to do. If I let fear consume me, if I didn't do my job, then what would happen? Who would it impact? All of us are here because our parents made sacrifices, our families made sacrifices, and because they overcame fear to create a better life for us. And all of you have the opportunity now to keep to your mission, your higher goal, and turn your fear outward into something more productive for the world. Third, about fear, is to find out what's hard and just do it. Think about our heroes and the hard things they did. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. speaking out for civil rights, Nelson Mandela against apartheid. Think about the everyday heroes, the man who jumps into the fire to save his neighbor, the school teacher who was shot to death while shielding her students. What they did is amazing and inspiring and really, really hard. Now, I'm not saying go find fires or gunfire to jump into, but rather don't shy away from things just because they're hard. Sometimes you won't know what they are until they happen. For me, that happened in LA on a beautiful Sunday morning. My mother had fought her cancer courageously for 8 years, enduring several surgeries and multiple rounds of chemotherapy and radiation. She was in the hospital because of a lung infection, and she was needing help to breathe. Now, my mother was an incredibly smart woman who had amazing foresight. She made it really clear to our family that she did not want life-prolonging measures like a breathing tube or CPR. She had suffered so much, and she made it really clear to me and my father and my sister that it was time to let go. Yet how do you make the decision to end your own mother's life? Her oncologist insisted that there was a chance she could recover. The ICU doctor said, well, who are we to play God? She needed a breathing tube, and we had to decide now. My father and my sister turned to me, the doctor, the one who supposedly makes life and death decisions every day, to figure out what to do. Well, at that moment, I was consumed with fear and shame and sadness. My mother had so wanted to see me marry, to see my sister graduate from college, and she would never do this if I made that decision. She had worked so hard and sacrificed so much for me. How could I be a good daughter for her? Well, I'll never forget my mother's nurse who came in and drew the curtain around my father, my sister, and me. He told us about the time that he had to make a similar decision for his terminally ill wife. He asked me what I knew about my mother's wishes. And he said to me, "This is hard. This is so hard, but you must do it." So making that decision to let my mother rest in peace, it was the most difficult and the most important thing I've ever done. But it was also a privilege, a gift that I could give my family to honor my mother's wishes and to end her suffering. And it was so hard, but the most important things in life are hard. And sometimes you have to eat bitter and overcome your fear. So future doctors, future pharmacists, future health professionals, here is my hope and my plea for you. Being a doctor isn't easy. People will tell you that you can't do it. Block them out. Ignore them. They're wrong because you can do it. And you have to believe in yourself and you have to persevere. Find mentors. Identify people you admire. They don't have to be people who are much older than you. They could be even a couple of years or even a year or two more than you because they're the ones who really will believe in you and tell you you can do it. There are enough naysayers, enough downers out there, and you need people who really believe in you. You also have to give back. All of us are here because we stood on the shoulders of other people, so give others a hand. Don't give in to the urge to compete with others and compromise your values. Even if others are mean to you, don't stoop to their level because it belittles you to be jealous and petty. Our goal should be to help people and improve the world. That's not a zero-sum game. It doesn't mean that if somebody loses, you win or the other way around. Remember that we're all in this together. Over time, you'll be faced with many temptations. Taking money from drug companies, going into a high-paying specialty that sounds good, but you may not really care about. Well, you know what? You have to stay true to yourself. Remember why you're doing what you're doing. Don't do something for short-term gain just because it sounds good or just because other people tell you that it's prestigious. You didn't work this hard or come this far to go down the wrong path. Remember at the end of the day who you're accountable to. Doctors are public servants, and if you're doing something that you don't want the public to know about, then there's something wrong with that, and you must stop it. So our conversation today isn't about the end of fear. It's also not a celebration of fear. What it is a challenge to abolish shame, to embrace our identities, to focus our fear outward and speak truth to power, to do what's right and to do what's hard. Remember what a privilege it is for us to have the opportunity to be here, to be able to pursue our dreams. What a privilege it is to be physicians who will take on the awesome responsibility of healing people, to become leaders who will tackle our society's most pressing injustices. What a privilege it is to turn fear inside out, to be true to who you are, and to be the best doctor for your patients and the best advocate for your communities. So I wish you all the best in your studies and in your career. Thank you again for inviting me to be here. So I know we have maybe about 5-6 minutes or so for questions. I'm very happy to take questions as a group, and between 2:30 and 3, I will also be signing books out in the pre-professional area, signing my book When Doctors Don't Listen, for those who would like a copy. And I'm also giving a talk specifically about narrative and the importance of story in medicine, 3, 4, and 5. So for those of you who are interested in that. But I'm happy to take any questions that people would like to ask now. Face your fear. Yes, sir. No. So the question is about what you really, from the perspective of an admissions committee, right? Whether you need to have some trauma to have happened in order to say, I overcame this, and that's why I'm the person that I am. I mean, that is the story that I just told. So I'm not saying that that's not a valid storyline. But actually, admissions officers, the reason they say that is the following. I think, at least, I'm projecting. I mean, I do admissions as well. This is what I would say. And those of you who came to my leadership talk earlier know some of this already, but you need to have a narrative. You need to have a story. You need to have something that ties your experiences and your mission and your passion together. So if you just give me the story of, well, I'm vaguely interested in medicine, and I happen to have done this other stuff, and I worked in a lab, and I did some clubs, and that's not a story to me, right? It just says that you did some stuff. You just did what came along. That doesn't show me your passion. That doesn't show me who you are. So if you have a story of, I overcame this adversity, that's a story, right? And that makes me know who you are. But just because you didn't have an adversity to overcome doesn't mean that you can't have a story. It could be something as simple as, I thought that my life was great. I was raised in a privileged background, and I thought that I had everything. But then I started college in an inner city neighborhood, and I saw how much homelessness there is. And I realized how much need there is, and I started volunteering in homeless shelters. I mean, that is a story. But the biggest mistake that I see people make, both people who come from privileged and not so privileged backgrounds, is that they can't put their experiences and their passion together into one. And you have to be driven by something bigger than yourself, right? No matter what it is, even if it's a personal experience that you had, a family experience that you had, fine. But it could also be something that's not a personal adversity, but is a community or society problem that you see. But work on that storyline, work on that narrative, because I think that is so critical to how you can articulate who you are. Does that answer your question? I'll take one more question, then I'm happy to answer questions one-on-one as well. Oh, now 2 more questions. All right, I'll take you and then in the back too. Yes. Yeah, so the question is, what inspired me to be a doctor? So I'm one of those people. I've known that I wanted to be a doctor for as long as I can remember. When I was ill, or when I was younger, I was really ill with asthma, and I grew up in China initially, and I remember lots of these experiences of going early at the wee hours of the morning, during all times of the day, being shuttled to hospitals. And I always saw hospitals as this kind of mysterious place, right, where all these things happened. And I think that mystique of medicine, but also the idea of healing people in their time of greatest need, is what really appealed to me. I'll say, though, that my mother's illness gave me a very different perspective, which is what could go wrong in medicine. She had misdiagnoses. She was the victim of medical error. I also saw how much disconnection there is in medicine. We intend for our healthcare system to be tailored to patients, right? That's the intention. I mean, these are the people we're serving. And yet healthcare systems are not designed for patients. They're not designed by patients. They're designed for doctors. They're designed for administrators. And so that is now my drive, to fix the system so that we are doing what is ultimately what's most important, which is to preserve the dignity of our patients and to really respect and to do what is best for the people that we're treating. And finally, gentleman in the back. It's very kind of you to say, so thank you. And I also just want to say back at all of you too that in hearing the stories that I have about your careers and your lives, that it's really inspirational. I'm extremely pleased to be here. I'll share one final story too, that back in 2005, I was the M.Sc national president, right? So that was a while ago. You can figure out my age from there. But at that time, I was asked by Jubin, who was one of the organizers for this conference, to come to this pre-med conference. And I thought, oh, pre-med conference, it'll be like 80 people, and I'm sure it'll be it'll be a short 3-hour seminar or something. But it was a whole 2-day event, and at that time they had 800 people. But to see how much you've grown over the years, and to see the amazing programming and the great speakers that you have, and also the community that's developing here, it really means a lot to me. And it says a lot, too, that all of you are here. So once again, I applaud you for all your work, and I thank you for inviting me to be here with you. Thank you.